Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I am the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some AI terms. So let's look at this organization. So I'm not going to go into the products today, but one of the first questions I always ask is, what are the products and services? Now we know there's a human resources component to these services because it's literally in the name of the business. So let me talk a little bit about that before we get into the AI terms. Human resources is generally one of the business units within any organization that processes the largest amount of personal data. And generally, when businesses are engaging with a privacy counsel like myself, the HR team is going to be in close discussion with the privacy counsel because the types of data that is processed by these organizations and teams within the business is generally more sensitive and could constitute a special category of personal data depending on geography. Now, I've made that distinction because depending on the country where the product and service is offered will impact whether a data identifier constitutes sensitive data or a special category. In the European Union, the legislation there is called the GDPR. That's what generally discusses how personal data can be processed. But in the United States, which is where I practice, the term sensitive data varies from state to state. What is considered sensitive in Nevada may not be the same thing as what is considered sensitive in California. So you need to take that into consideration because what is associated with processing that type of identifier is generally additional safeguards by the organization. And HR is generally the team that will process that type of information. So between that and then the use of artificial intelligence, businesses should walk very cautiously when integrating that type of AI product into an existing business process, creating their own AI with respect to processing that type of information, and make sure that any responsibilities under the data protection laws are being met as it pertains to using AI within the organization based on the geographies where they process personal data. So there's 3 different things I mentioned. Now, there's lots of details that are missing when I do these reviews, but I still think it's valuable to talk about what could be a consideration for an organization when drafting these terms and distributing them to potential customers. Because a lot of the public-facing documents, I've seen a trend over the years that I've practiced. I think that businesses are moving towards a model where the contractual documents that are distributed to customers appear on the website because it's easier to distribute that way, as opposed to having lots of emails go back and forth. Now, I can't say that for sure for every single business, but I've definitely seen a trend, which, if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen we definitely review a lot of terms of use, SaaS agreements, privacy notices that are distributed, privacy policy documentation. So essentially, I say all that to say, I think there's a trend moving towards having these terms of use on the public-facing website. Now, it's easy for a customer to do due diligence. Let's say, for example, you're considering signing up with this organization. Before you decide to, go into the contract negotiation process, they've offered you what their terms are. You can make a decision whether this is good for your organization in advance of going into a contract with them. And you can have a privacy counsel make a determination based on your risk tolerance, right? When we look at privacy and our privacy programs as businesses, we need to look at what is our risk appetite. Are we willing to accept certain risks pertaining to our business processes or not? And does that align with the third-party service providers that we are aligning our business organization with? Every business generally will need some type of service provider. Even businesses like law firms, let me talk a little bit about myself. There's a lot of marketing that is done for my firm. I have to liaise with marketers to assist me. I don't have the capacity to do that because I'm running the firm. So I outsource, and just like lots of other businesses, outsource lots of tasks that they don't do internally, right? Okay, let's get into the AI terms. This appendix governs the customer's use of artificial intelligence-enabled features on the services. Now, let's talk about this from the perspective of the organization first, and then we'll talk about the perspective for the customer. If I was drafting these terms for a client, I would ask them to list every single service that has enabled AI, because that is going to allow me to provide advisory on each sentence and provision. The enabled features of AI is going to vary business to business. The enabled features for this organization may not be the same for a different organization in a different industry like healthcare. So I just wanted to make mention of that from this business's perspective. Now, it appears, and I don't know this for a fact, but if the customer is agreeing to have the AI features enabled with their services, then they're agreeing to all of these insights. Now, I don't know if this particular organization allows for something called redlines. So redlines is basically when you go into a contract negotiation with an organization and they allow you to remove certain provisions that don't align with you as the customer. Now, a lot of these documents on the website are take it or leave it. So when you do the due diligence process, you're looking to see if you can agree to each of these terms. Can I agree to appropriate use? Can I agree to comply with the law? Can I agree to this provision too? I don't want to dwell too much on that, but I think it's valuable to know what goes into a negotiation and what type of counsel is valuable for businesses to obtain when it comes to using artificial intelligence, because generally there are implications and consequences when it comes to using AI within your organization, and you need to anticipate that because you're still responsible. I haven't talked a lot about this in any of the AI reviews, but there's terminology in the privacy space, and essentially it says a data controller, which is basically the term for an entity that determines the means and purpose of processing. That terminology is very specific in the data protection space in that it places responsibilities on an organization that determines the means and purpose of processing of personal information. That would generally be the customer in this scenario. The data processor will be this entity that is providing a service because they're operating based on the customer's instructions. Irrespective of whether you decide to go into business with a third-party provider, doesn't absolve you of obligations you have as a data controller. You still are the data controller in any instance where you determine the means and purpose of processing, which you would do if you engage with this third-party provider. So you need to see, what does our privacy program allow, and does it align with these provisions? Now, let's talk a bit about this, because personal data is what we do at the Data Privacy Lawyer firm. So let's take a look at this provision. It says, customer may not provide to the AI services any information that identifies, relates to, describes, or is reasonably capable of being associated with or could reasonably be linked directly or indirectly with a particular individual. Essentially, personal data, personal information, personally identifiable information, or similar terms under applicable laws. Let's talk about this. I'm going to make 2 comments, and then that'll be the end of this review. The first comment I have is, it appears as though the AI services being offered by this organization doesn't process personal data or doesn't allow the customer to provide that type of information. Now, the second comment I want to make is, this was last updated 1st of October 2024. Is this consistent with the products in January 2026? That would be my first question. I find it interesting that the customer is not able to provide to the AI services personal data, given that this is a HR platform. But again, when I do these reviews, there's a lot of nuance that is missing about how the product actually operates. So those would be the 2 questions that I would have. I think it's interesting that they've provided this provision, but I also personally think that it's possible that these terms are being read in addition to other agreements we can see outside of this appendix. So they all need to be read together. So there's a lot of questions that I would have. And also, I think most importantly is the fact that these terms are a bit dated and may not reflect the current solutions. But I don't know that for a fact. I hope you found this review valuable. If you have comments about what I've discussed on the video, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another one.